Without any new money coming in from his business, and having already spent all the money he had on Yatsuhashi, Jito finds himself penniless. But he can't stop wandering around. No, that's
actually the plot of Hiyori and Wano, dude.
Obsessed Jito finally snaps. How dare you ignore me after all this, you ungrateful wretch! And he chases her to a tea house, when he once thought to be the love of his life, and with a single stroke, slices her in half. Her legs and waist tumble down the stairs.
So now it's time for when nice people snapped in history. This literally sounded like some anime trope, and I was like, that sounds cool as fuck to see in real life, bruh. I want to see if there's any cool examples.
Is not just a modern thing, and here are 3 times it happened in history with some pretty severe consequences. Number 1, Jean de Clisson. It's the year 1300.
Jean de Clisson.
And a red-haired baby girl is born to a minor noble family in Brittany. Her parents name her Jean, and as they lean down to look at their adorable newborn baby, they smile and say, "Jackpot!" You see, Jean is a beautiful child, a very valuable asset in those days.
So it's beautiful child? That's crazy. Like, you're literally like thanking God. You're like, thank God you made my baby hot. It's a little strange on more than one level.
She was old enough, her parents eagerly married her off to a noble in exchange for a whole lot of land. Being just 12 years old, Jean probably had no idea what love was. So she just went along with the plan and quickly had 2 kids with this guy and accepted that this was probably what her life was going to be. But 14 years later, her husband unexpectedly dies. And as a 26-year-old...
Watch history's biggest gooners? Is that real?
And as a 26-year-old single mother in the Middle Ages, she needs to find someone else to marry to take care of her and her kids. She was still very young, and according to historical accounts, still super hot. So she quickly marries a member of the Breton ruling family. But his family thinks their guy would be better off marrying someone a little richer, and so they get the Pope to quickly annul their marriage.
The Pope!
Jean then meets and marries another Breton noble named Olivier de Clisson. And this time, the vibes are completely different. Against all odds, in a time when marriage between nobles was usually just political, Jean and Olivier fall madly in love. Aww. They go on to have 5 kids together, and life is perfect. A loving husband, beautiful children, wealth and power. What more could you want? But everything changes in 1341 when the Duke of Brittany dies without leaving a clear heir, and the family feud over who gets to be the next duke spirals into a 30-year war called the Breton War of Succession. The kings of England and France both rubbed their hands together, spying an opportunity to ensure the new duke would support them in their own 100 years war. So the English support John of Montfort, the half-brother of the duke, while the French supported his niece and her husband Charles de Blois. Jean and her husband choose to support Charles de Blois and side with the French and their king Philip VI. Fighting for the French, Olivier and his army recapture the lost city of Vannes, but the victory is short-lived and the English quickly take it back. Olivier and other commanders there are captured.
So the French won and then the English won.
Traded back to the French for a suspiciously small amount of money, and this makes the French start to believe he's a traitor. The Pope comes in and calls a timeout on the war in 1343, and in this brief truce, the king invites Olivier and other nobles from Breton to
Pope always just doing shit.
Paris to participate in a tournament to celebrate the newfound peace. Olivier thinks this is awesome and travels to France. But the second he steps onto French soil, he's arrested and taken prisoner. He's tried for treason and thrown into a dungeon to await his trial. Back in Breton, Jean finds out about this, rushes to Paris, and desperately tries to get her husband released, even going so far as to bribe the king's sergeant, but ultimately fails. Olivier is given a sham trial, and in August, he's marched out to the town square and publicly beheaded.
Damn!
His body is then hung up in Paris, and his head was shipped off to Brittany to
Dude! He wasn't even a traitor! Yeah,
French for a suspiciously small
They didn't say he was a traitor! They just killed his ass!
Marched out to the town square, spike, publicly beheaded. His body is then hung up in Paris, and his head was shipped off to Brittany to be displayed on a spike. Horrific for anyone, but for a noble to be treated like this was the ultimate disrespect. In Brittany, Jean brings her 2 youngest sons to look at their father's severed head.
Who's gonna get the most devious get back?
She forces them to stare at their father's pale, lifeless face that is now weeks old and is rotting and covered in a
the Ned Stark treatment.
Swarm of flies. Inside, she boils with rage and refuses to let her children look away. They must understand that the king must pay. And so, at the age of 43, Jean decides to dedicate the rest of her life to making the rest of King Philip's life a living hell.
That's fair, bro.
She breaks all ties to France and sells off her entire estate, land, jewelry, anything and everything she owned of value, and uses the cash to raise a small personal army. She arrives at Chateau a castle controlled by the French loyalists. She weeps loudly at the castle gates, asking for the men to allow a heartbroken widow entry. The commander of the castle looks down and recognizes her as a noble who supports Charles de Blois and opens the gates. Once the gates are open, Jean's army reveal themselves and storm into the castle. The castle garrison is caught off guard, and
damn smirk.
Jean orders her men to massacre them all. She spares just one man and gives him instructions to give King Philip the regards of Jean de Clisson. She continued to sack castles along the Normandy coast with her personal army, and eventually she buys 3 warships, which she paints black and dyes their sails blood red. She names her flagship My Revenge.
Sick. and she calls it my revenge. Full black ships with red sails sounds awesome.
And essentially becomes a pirate. She carries with her a massive axe and begins terrorizing French merchant ships in the English Channel. Her tactics are brutal, as she's not so interested in looting. Her only goal is revenge on the French.
God
the crew
damn.
of every ship she targets is slaughtered, and she personally beheads every French nobleman she finds with her axe. Only one witness on each ship is left alive to tell the story of what happened.
Raw.
As word of Jean and her black fleet gets back to the king, she becomes known as the Lioness of Brittany.
The Lioness of Brittany. Dude, you know her husband watching so proud.
Of this crazy redhead with
From
these
hell
black
or
ships
heaven,
that's
wherever he
fucking up
at.
French merchant ships somehow gets back to the English, and they immediately recognize her as a valuable ally and begin funding her to keep up the good work.
They
But Jean's
fund her.
reign of terror couldn't last forever, and in 1348, the French Navy finally tracked down her fleet. In a brutal battle, her fleet is destroyed and her flagship is boarded. But when the soldiers look for Jean, she's already long gone. She had escaped in a
She
tiny
fucking
boat with some members of her
dipped.
crew. With no food or water, they floated helplessly for 6 days, and some crew members ultimately did not survive the escape. Finally, on the 7th day, Jean drifted onto English shores, half dead, but still alive enough to ruin King Philip VI's day. Upon landing in England, she was welcomed by King Edward III as a respected ally. With her ships and crew gone, she decides she had enough of the pirate life. 2 years later, her nemesis, King Philip VI, dies anyway, closing that chapter, and she meets and marries an English knight named Walter Bentley. They return to
And then she
Brittany
moves
together,
on.
where she peacefully lived out the rest of her days, dying at the ripe age of 59. Which these
Damn.
days seems way too young, but for a mother of 7 in the 1300s who had also been, a freaking pirate, it was
She
a pretty
had
good
a
run. Number
life,
2,
bro.
Jito Zaemon.
That does sound like a movie plot. That sounds literally insane. Why is that not a movie?
Number 2, Jito Zaemon. It's the end
Jito
of the 17th century in Japan,
Zaemon!
and a wealthy charcoal
Sounds like straight out of Wano.
dealer named Jito Zaemon from the village of Sano is wandering around the bustling city of Edo. Running a successful business is tough, and Jito needed some time off to recharge and thought the big city would be the best place to do just that. While walking around, he accidentally stumbles into the pleasure district of Yoshiwara. Whoops,
A
how did
pleasure
that happen?
district?
And there, he finds himself surrounded by the most beautiful women who all smile at him as he passes by. Jito cannot help but stare back in awe and wave sheepishly as this was something
He
he
thinks
was
they
totally
want him, but brother, you're in a pleasure
not used to.
district.
You see, due to a case of smallpox he suffered as a child, his face was badly disfigured, and no woman back
Ooh.
home would even look at him or give him the time of day. As he wanders around Yoshiwara, he spots a beautiful courtesan in the distance. He rushes over to get a better look, and she's hands down the most stunning woman he has ever seen. He
The most stunning woman in question. That's so funny the way they're drawn. It's like you just gotta take his word for it that they were the most beautiful.
follows her back to her establishment and learns her name is Yatsuhashi. She's an oiran, a courtesan of the highest class who only services nobles and the ultra-rich.
This might be Wano.
As a successful businessman, Jito had money, but merchants were on the lowest rung of the social ladder. Could he even have a shot to buy some time with this goddess of a woman? But to his surprise, Yatsuhashi smiles and accepts him. Now, it's important to note that at this time, the courtesans in this pleasure district had the right to turn away customers they didn't want to service. And so, for the first time in his life, Jito seems to have found a woman who can look beyond his scarred face and see him for who he truly is.
But brother, she's still a professional
Instantly
blower.
falls in love. Nothing in his life matters anymore, and he stays in Edo spending all of his time with Yatsuhashi.
She's got the
He begins to
professional
shower
grip, bruh.
her with
It
the
ain't
most
the lover
extravagant
grip.
gifts. No expense is too much for the love of his life. But back home in Sano, without him around, Jito's charcoal business begins to fall apart. The company soon goes bankrupt, and his home and all of his land are sold
No.
off to pay his debts. Without any new money
No.
coming in from his business, and having already spent all the money he had on Yatsuhashi, Jito finds himself penniless. But he
No,
can't stop
that's
wandering around
actually the plot of Hiyori and Wano,
Kiwara
dude.
obsessively trying to catch his love when she's walking about. One day, Jito finally manages to catch Yatsuhashi walking in a procession of courtesans, and he calls out to her. She ignores him, and in that moment, he
You
comes
broke
to the
bitch.
painful realization that
You ain't
his
got enough for
relationship
this
with her
anymore.
was strictly business. She never had any real feelings for him. She was just humoring him for his money.
Literally.
I poured my heart out, spent my fortune. I'd heard courtesans were not sincere, but I believed Yatsuhashi was different. How could I have been so stupid to trust her? The pain is unbearable.
So is he about
So
to
on December
snap?
19th, 1696, Jito finds Yatsuhashi again walking through Yoshiwara in a procession, and in a final attempt yells out to her, "Please, could you just say one nice thing to me? I've lost everything because of you." Again, she ignores him and
Not
keeps
even
walking.
one
Finally recognizing he's
nice
truly lost
thing.
everything, Jito finally snaps. How
Oh.
dare you ignore me after
Oh.
all this, you ungrateful wretch! And he chases her to a tea house. Yatsuhashi is quickly escorted inside, but Jito barges his way in and draws a short sword. According to some stories, it's a named blade called a Kagotsurube. "You've humiliated me enough!" he shouts, and he rushes at Yatsuhashi, who's
Oh,
making her way
shit.
up a staircase. He
She's
lunges
running.
at the woman he once thought to be the love of his life, and with a single stroke, slices her in half.
Oh!
Her legs and waist tumble down the staircase while her hands grip its railing. Jito
Oh
runs up
my
the stairs past his former
God!
lover and onto the roof.
How
attempting
is
to
this called when nice people snap? How is he ever a nice person? He just paid for coochie.
escape. The commotion
And then she
attracts the
said no because he was broke and then killed her. I don't think he was ever nice.
police, and neighbors try to hit him with long sticks to get him down, but he's swinging his sword like a madman. Eventually, someone throws a
Long
bucket of water on
sticks.
him, which causes him to slip and fall to the ground, where he's quickly captured and later sentenced to death. Number 3, Jeffrey Hudson.
Nah,
It's 60
dude. Imagine that's your legacy you live. You slip on some roof tiles and executed because you got denied some
19,
cootie.
and in the small town of Oakham,
Some
England,
coochie.
a boy named Jeffrey Hudson's born. While for the most part he looks like a
That's
completely normal
crazy.
newborn, his parents soon begin suspecting something is very wrong. Time passes and he learns to crawl, to walk, and to talk, but he never grows any taller than his birth height. At 3, he's still just 19 inches tall. Now, back in the
19
1600s,
inches! He's still baby height?
little people were considered barely above animals, and Jeffrey's father was well aware of this.
Wait, no,
Looking
19 inches is like literally like a pygmy. That's like that. That's like that.
at his tiny boy running around, he could only see an incredibly difficult life in store for him. What would happen to little Jeffrey when he and his wife passed away? Who would take care of him?
So true.
Luckily, due to his job as the keeper of the baiting bulls for the Duke of Buckingham, Jeffrey's father saw one path that could possibly give his son a somewhat respectable life. So when
Lord
Jeffrey turned 7,
accurate
his
hay height. This is not me. Just because we both got brown hair.
father brings him to the Duchess of Buckingham and presents him as a gift. See, little people, or dwarfs as they were known back then, were often collected by nobility as curiosities that were used to entertain guests.
Collected?
Jeffrey was blessed in the sense that though he was small, he was perfectly proportionate with no deformities or disabilities. He was, for all intents and purposes, just a little person. The Duchess stares at Jeffrey like she's seeing a shiny Pokemon in real life and immediately accepts him and he joins her court. Now, around this time, the Duke and Duchess were expecting a visit from the king and his new French bride, Queen
Now the
Henrietta
horse guy's tweaking. Look at the horse.
Marie, and they thought that Jeffrey would be the ultimate surprise and delight for their dinner guests. At the banquet, a large pie is placed on the
What
table.
is that called? What is that job called when you're like when you're a horse guy?
Now, around this time, the Duke and Duchess were expecting a visit from
Driver?
the king and his new French bride, Queen Henrietta Marie, and they thought that Jeffrey would be the ultimate surprise and delight for their dinner guests. At the banquet, a large pie is placed on the table in front of the royal couple. The queen stares at the pie, wondering what surprise might be hiding inside, when suddenly, on command, Jeffrey, dressed in a tiny suit of armor, bursts from the pie crust and starts aggressively dueling an invisible opponent with his tiny sword.
What?
The queen finds this hilarious. How is someone this
What?
small even real? She must have him. And so the Duchess gives Jeffrey to the queen and he travels back with her to London. Jeffrey joins the queen's collection of oddities and quickly becomes her
Oh
favorite. She makes
my
sure he has the
God.
best food and accommodations. He gets the formal education of a noble and servants that he can call upon for whatever he needs. Somehow, against
Lore, real life, accurate Tyrion?
all odds, being tiny was not the curse he thought, and miraculously, it's brought him a wonderful life. He develops a deep affection for his queen and works hard to put on the best acts he can for her guests.
Fuck it up, fuck
His
it up,
hit
fuck it
routine
up, fuck
was
it up.
one where he partnered with one of the queen's other curiosities, a man named William Evans, who was a giant that stood over 7 feet tall. At dinner
Damn.
parties, Evans would pull out a loaf of bread from one pocket and then pull Jeffrey out of his other pocket. He would then cut the bread and serve it.
Why
Jeffrey was
was his ass? Wait, what is his name? Jeffrey. What is his last name? I need to see this. I need to look this guy up in real life. Hold on.
It's-
Jeffrey Hudson. He was literally 18 or 19 inches tall. That's like half of a short. That's like half of a little person. That's literally this. A tone tata.
works hard to put on the best acts he can for her guests. His hit routine was one where he partnered with one of the queen's other curiosities, a Lord Minimus, and though Jeffrey out of his other pocket, who would then cut the bread and serve it. Jeffrey was given the nickname Lord Minimus, and though he initially enjoyed the spoils of the royal life, he slowly became resentful of the golden cage he had found himself in. He realized that no matter how educated he became or what skills he worked to acquire, he would always be treated like a joke and never truly accepted as an equal by
That's sad.
anyone. But in 1642, Jeffrey found himself with the opportunity of a lifetime to prove he was more than just a
I
court
mean, at
jester.
least he's not getting like fucking murdered in the street or something.
See, while Jeffrey had been busy making nobles laugh, the Queen's husband, King Charles, had been busy alienating the entire parliament of his country. Charles believed he was God's chosen monarch, and rather predictably, this point of view was badly received by nearly everyone. And so by 1642, a massive civil war broke out. Supporting the king and his queen, Jeffrey fought to take a more active role in the war. He pleaded with the queen for an official position in the royalist army, arguing that he was an expert horseman and a crack shot. The queen eventually gives in and appoints the now 23-year-old Jeffrey to captain of the horse. While many in the court saw this as a joke, Jeffrey didn't care, and he took his new job and new title seriously. But in 1644, before he had any real shot to prove himself a man beyond his inches, the royalists were clearly losing this war, and the queen flees to her homeland of France, bringing Jeffrey with her. In France, court life resumes in much the same fashion as before the war, but Jeffrey has no intentions of returning to the life of an oddity. He was now Captain Jeffrey Hudson. Lord Minimus was gone, and he made it clear to everyone that he would not tolerate any further mockery. Any man who insulted him would pay with his life. A man named Charles Crofts thinks that Jeffrey's declaration of dignity is all an act and bursts out laughing.
literally
No one knows what
crying
Crofts said to
laughing.
Jeffrey, but it pissed him off, and he challenges Charles to a duel. Still laughing, Charles accepts this challenge from the great Lord Minimus, thinking this is all a part of a joke that will have a huge punchline in the end. But Jeffrey was not f***ing around at all.
He was
The date of the
genuinely
duel is set for
fuming.
October, and it would be conducted with pistols on horseback. On the day of the duel, when it came time for weapons to be presented, Jeffrey pulls out his tiny custom pistol. Crofts snickers, reaches into his pocket, and dramatically reveals a squirt gun, earning applause and laughter from the
Squirt
crowd.
gun.
But Jeffrey was done being laughed at.
Oh,
He tightened his grip on his
no.
pistol and orders for Crofts to be handed a real gun. Crofts is quickly outfitted with his own pistol and was like, "Wait, are you for real?" The two men then mounted their horses, ride to a distance,
How
and
do you
face
not
each other.
know
The
still?
signal is given, and they each charge forward. Crofts
Okay,
fires
but it's
first.
a lose-lose because if you hit his ass, you kill a 19-inch tall guy. And if you die, then you died
Missing Jeffrey's
to a
small
19-inch tall guy.
frame, and with laughter from the crowd echoing in his ears, Jeffrey raises his pistol, aims, and fires. His bullet strikes Crofts in the middle of his forehead and sends him toppling backward off his horse, dead before he hits the ground.
Damn! What a fucking shot! I'm surprised that gun had enough power to get through a human skull. What a shot!
That's like not funny at all. The crowd
That's
is shocked
pretty
into
hilarious.
silence. The Queen's dwarf has just murdered a
Now,
noble. By this
now, in hindsight, what was Usopp doing there? In hindsight, that's the funniest shit I've ever seen in history, dude. That's pretty fucking funny.
time, dueling was illegal in France, and Jeffrey was quickly arrested and tried for murder. He's saved at the last possible moment by Queen Henrietta, who negotiates for him to be exiled instead of executed. And so she and Jeffrey say their final goodbyes, and he sails off
And
from
he
France.
doesn't even get murdered
Jeffrey
for
soon
it.
learns just
What
how
did that
good
mean?
life was, being laughed at as one of the Queen's curiosities when he's quickly captured at sea by Barbary pirates. He's sold into slavery and spends the next 25 years as a slave in North
Oh
Africa.
my god. Oh my god. What do you even use him for? He's 19 inches tall. What, to like move around blades of grass? Like literally he literally is like a third of a typical little person.
He finally escapes and makes it back to England just in time for a severe anti-Catholic purge and is thrown into prison for 2 years for being Catholic. He eventually is released and dies just a few short years later in 1682
Bro
penniless,
was a slave for 25 years.
and is buried in an unmarked grave.
That's the size of a cat. Bro escaped. He probably got to the damn key lock or something. He's 19 inches tall. Wait, what? He didn't die?
And is thrown into prison for 2 years for being Catholic. He eventually is released and dies just a few short years later in 1682 penniless, and is buried in an unmarked grave. Now, this is all super depressing and all, but there is a conspiracy theory that this record of being captured by pirates is actually not what happened. See, Jeffrey made a surprise appearance at Queen Henrietta's funeral in 1669, leading some to suspect that the Queen safely hid him away the whole time.
Oh, damn. Bro, that's fucking crazy. That's literally nuts. I can't believe he was 19 inches tall. I really can't believe that's insane.